Hello everyone, I'm your host MX2, and today we'll be going over release log for HardOps 987_26. For this update, there's been improvements with the way that LookDev transitions over to render when using the R hotkey. The Intersect boolean finally has a hotkey. The tools that we've been working on for geometry nodes has now been transitioned over to the shader editor as well, so you can now use the Q menu inside of the shader editor. Everscroll now has additive mode working in a proper state, which means it's now the only scroll left in HOPS, basically aiming to replace ModScroll Classic, which was just antiquated, and we've now double checked to make sure that we've assimilated all of it into Everscroll. Under small stuff, sort bypass has been improved for this update, where it's received an expanded subpanel, which I try to expand upon a little more further on in the video. But the main theme of this has been bug fixes for Blender 3.0 and Blender 3.1. There's been so many changes and things that has happened over in Blender 3.1 that we've just taken a moment to just step back and just make sure that everything's working properly before beginning to aim for progression again. So, you know, still a little bit more work left for us to do, but for the most part, everything should be stable for you, whether you're using Blender 2.93, Blender 3.0, or Blender 3.1. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into what's going on in Blender for HardOps 987_26. So here we are in an older version of Blender with an older version of HardOps. And so what I'm going to do is press Alt-V in order to jump into LookDev. And first we'll go into LookDev, and if we press R, we can actually set up left mouse click to set the result that we're looking at to actually be the render as well. So basically we click, it applies it, and then we jump over to render from LookDev. We see that the same environment that we have as the background has been made as the render result. But if you also look at it, we can see that once we turn the blur off, we jump back and forth between the render and the LookDev, we see that the orientation of the back plate is different. So this is something that we wanted to resolve in this particular update. So here we are in the most current version of Blender 3.1.0. And if we were to press Alt-VV, we're here in LookDev. And if we press R, we can set ourselves to set up the render as well. And once we click to apply, we jump from the render to the LookDev. We see that it is an identical thing. Once we turn off the blur, we can definitely confirm that we're getting the exact same rotation. So this was a bit of an oversight from us in the past, but I'm just happy to announce that it's now been corrected. So rather than saying, hey guys, we added a new hotkey, I figured it'd be cooler to show it in action. So we have our main shape. We have our simple cutout, this is triangle, that we can move around. And then I have this piece that we're just basically going to array and fit inside of this. So if we press Q, we see that we have the option for array v2, so I'm just going to click on array. We'll press X until we get the axis that we want, and because we're in 3D mode, whenever we roll the wheel, we gain more array segments in between the 2 points, which is just a little bit more convenient. So if we click, we're able to apply. Clicking the Hops button, you can see that there's an area that lists our hotkeys. Basically clicking the Q, and we see that there's a new hotkey of Control plus numpad multiply in order to use Intersect. So if we select this object, or actually if we select our cutter and then we select our main object and we press Control numpad multiply, we see that we have performed our Intersect boolean. However, in this case, we don't want to sort modifiers. So by unchecking it, we're able to get this to perfectly fit. So just like that, we're able to now use Control numpad multiply in order to use Intersect booleans inside of HardOps. So in this particular situation, we're just going to select the capture attribute, and then we're just going to shift click on cycle node from the Q menu. And while holding shift to scroll, we can actually jump to the second input, and we see that we're now able to scroll and bring in a mix node, which using mixes to combine vectors is something that's a little new to me, but just using it in cases like this is just something that makes life just a lot easier. I mean, it's really small, but whenever cycle node was being used with vector outputs, not being able to bring up a mix was something that particularly bothered me, so I'm just glad to see that it's been resolved. Previously, we talked about how we added a series of tools to assist you with the geometry node editor when it comes to scrolling through nodes. However, this time we're actually going to jump over to shading, and I just want to show that there's now a Q menu for shading where cycle node is there, our good friend. Let's shift click cycle node and we can just begin rolling through some nodes to cycle where we can bring in our mix shader. Let's also begin just kind of giving this some room. Let's jump off of this and we could press F in order to flip back to the other side. For our input of the factor, we could just press S and search, type in wire to find wireframe, and that'll get us started there. Let's go ahead and do a shift jump off again. We could press F to flip to the other side. We can shift scroll in order to locate what we're going for, which is transparent. After clicking, we now have that as our secondary input. Let's go ahead and make the connection, and under our material settings we just want to make sure that our blend mode is set to alpha blend, and we also want to enable screen space refraction so that way things just display correctly. But just like that, we can now use cycle node inside of the geometry node editor depending on the results that we're going for. For this, we may want to actually switch our output so that way it displays correctly. It was looking a little odd there. Now it's actually looking the way that we intended it. Here we have an object that's built up out of cutters. If we look at the modifier stack, we see that this has about 26 different cutters on it. And if we hover over it and we hold control while we're in Hops tool, we can see that there's dots showing as little approximation points for every cutter that we can actually click to bring back. However, the general way that you bring back cutters is by pressing Q and using something called Everscroll. Generally, clicking it will take you into something called Boolscroll, where you can basically scroll through your booleans in order to find the boolean that you want. And then when you find the one that you want, you can press A, and you can continue scrolling until you find the next one that you want. Press A again in order to drop that one in your list of booleans appended to visibility, until you finally have all the booleans appended to visibility that you actually want selected. And then whenever you click, you now have those particular booleans appended to your visibility set to visible. So now we can actually grab them and move them around. However, in the event that you want to, I accidentally jumped out of the collection. I'm so used to pressing 1 to isolate my collection. But anyways, so from here, let's say you wanted to go back into Everscroll in order to find more booleans in particular that you want. Well, because you accessed it in its classic mode, it no longer will have the ones visible that you had visible to begin with, because it makes them all invisible for you to begin scrolling through them. So previously there was a mode called additive mode, where basically if you set your scroll type to be additive, it would make it where whenever you scroll, it will keep the ones visible that you originally had visible, and then allow you to scroll through and find the ones that you want to append to visibility and press A to do so, and not actually disturb those as you are working. So just letting users know that that has been improved for this particular update. So now you see that in addition to the ones that we originally made visible, we have additional ones that we've made visible, and we're able to select our object, press Q, go into Everscroll again, and we're able to scroll through the remainder. And we're not actually disturbing the ones that we already have set to visible. In fact, to show how we've taken this step further, if we press tab, you can see in the .ui that the particular booleans that have been made visible prior to starting the operation whenever you're in additive mode are not even displaying the UI. So this means that you can definitely tell visually which ones were set to be visible prior to instantiating the operation. So that way it's a little bit easier. But even better is that in the event that you wanted to, say, apply a swath of modifiers, like for example, I want to apply from boolean 1 to boolean 8, which is called boolean 7, I could just hold shift, click on this checkbox, and we see that it actually applies all the way up to that particular modifier, simplifying the operation greatly. In fact, from here we can do the same thing, just applying all those modifiers, including the ones that were originally appended to visibility. But even better is if I right click, it will make it as if I've never done any of that applying. So basically making applying a theoretical thing that we're just testing out. But if we were to left click, we actually have applied what we've done. And so now we have selected the boolean that we were on in the scroll that we were doing. But whenever I select the main object, we see that we've applied a large amount of modifiers, including the ones that were previously set to be visible prior to us starting the operation. So in the event that you still need to apply them, you're still able to do so because applying within a range is still that important to us. So sort is a modifier management system that exists across HardOps, Boxcutter, and KitOps. So basically by pressing Control tilde, we can see that the option for sort modifiers is here. And we'll be focusing on basically sort array and sort bevel. If we hover over sort array, we see that sort array will ensure that array modifiers are placed after any boolean modifiers are created. And we see that bevel with sort bevel ensures that bevel modifiers are placed after any modifiers created. Like I said, the sort modifiers is shared across multiple tools. So if we expand the subpalette for behaviors inside of Boxcutter, we see that the first option is sort modifiers, where the same options basically exist. And even if we use the hops button and we go to the KitOps tab, we see that at the very bottom of the KitOps tab is an option for the sort modifiers where you can get in depth with the intimate options as well. So just letting users know that sort is there across all of our tools, sharing the same options. Alright, so starting out, we'll just take our cube, we'll press Q, and we're just going to add an array. And of course, because of the rules of sort that we discussed, by pressing Control tilde, we see that basically any boolean modifiers that we place are going to be before array because of the rules of sort, meaning that when we perform a cut, this cut is going to impact our instances as well. And this is the way that we want things to be. We want to be able to cut our main object, and it happens with all of our instances, so that way our work is being minimized. However, let's say that we up the ante and we press Q and we add a bevel on top, but we also press 1 to set our defaults, and then from here we alt-click sharpen in order to add a weighted normal. If we look at our modifier stack, this is what our modifiers is currently looking like. So we basically have everything being arrayed, beveled, and then a weighted normal being added after all of the boolean activity. So we can continue working on this, and because of the beauty of sort, we're able to have everything work instead of just having our modifiers being appended on the end and us having to manually reorder them. So whenever sort's working out great, it's great. But let's say that we wanted to no longer affect the bevel. So we're just going to basically add an ignore flag by basically pressing space at the beginning of the name of bevel. And what this means is that on the next cut, instead of being automatically sorted before the bevel, which gives it a nice fillet on the edges, we're looking at a situation where it's actually just going to be very rough. However, this sets us up to add a subsequent bevel on top of this in order to just grab this edge in particular, and all these new ones that are being created that are just bypassing that sort. And if we look at our sort settings, we press Control tilde and we expand on our modifier settings, we see that basically our ignore flag is set to space. So you can actually change the character to be whatever you want, but for us, we just have it default set to just space. But at least now users can manually change it to whatever they need to. But the next thing I want to talk about is just having sort just stop altogether. So basically, if we put an underscore, this means that basically everything that happens beyond this point is being considered static and will no longer be dealt with sort in any capacity. So now we're adding these cuts, but the most interesting thing about these particular cuts is they're being placed after the array. So we have something very unique happening with this, but just letting you know that at any time that you want to just simply bypass the rules of sort, that is why these things exist, because normally sort would just be this overbearing master. However, we felt that there was some backdoors needed to just be able to escape such things in the event that it was just getting unruly and you were needing to just go completely unique with some particular changes on a piece. So let's just Control Shift click on bevel inside the Q menu, and we're just adding a new bevel just on this edge. And this is what we're looking at so far. So just like that, you can see how effective it could be to be using stop and ignore flags whenever it comes to using sort inside of HardOps and Boxcutter. So let's just press Q. We'll shift click Everscroll in order to boot it up in modifier mode, and by pressing shift spacebar, we can now just scroll through these modifiers, and we see that, you know, nothing is being bypassed because of render visibility is being toggled off, and best part is that in F12 we have no issues there because we're no longer having to use render visibilities in order to bypass these things and set flags because of the underscore and spacebar system. But just want to give a little bit more emphasis on why these systems exist, so hopefully users can utilize them to their fullest. Another way to look at this is basically gaining additional versatility whenever it comes to using the sort system inside of HardOps, Boxcutter, and KitOps. But let's try this another way. So we're just going to remove the array, and we're just going to press Alt-X to bring up mirror. And by using modifier, which can be brought up by just pressing X to jump to defaults, we're just going to mirror modifier this over to the other side. So now that there's a mirror at the very end of the stack, this means that on our next cut, it's going to attempt to sort the modifiers to be in the proper order. But I actually was thinking that it would have placed the mirror before the bevel, but proved me wrong. So now we see that as I'm performing these cuts with Boxcutter, that they're also appearing on the other side of the model because of sort. But let's say we wanted to go off the reservation and we wanted to do something unique like add an antenna. Well, let's just go to the modifier and we could just add a spacebar, and from here, if we just draw a circle, we're basically bypassing sort and we're able to draw it uniquely on this side. And just like that, we're able to begin just doing things on one side that we don't even have to worry about replicating on the other, because you know it would normally have done that by default. But sometimes you just want to go unique, and instead of just having to go in and just fandangle your modifiers, it's just easier to just go in and just mess with the name a little bit and just bypass it altogether. So right now, a lot of our current work is just ensuring that we're set up for Blender 3.0 and 3.1 whenever they're official. But one of the things that was first pointed out with the last release was an issue with blank material and car paint. So if we press Alt-M and we use blank material and we use the F9 to jump over to car paint, we see that car paint's no longer throwing an error inside of Blender 3.0 or Blender 3.1. So just glad that that's been resolved. However, having it replace all of the material index is something that we may want to check into in the future. Let's just press Ctrl-Z to go back to our original, just to let users know, in the event that you wanted to just replace specifically a particular material index, that's where you would want to go into material scroll, where you could then press T in order to change your type to be car paint, and then when you roll the wheel, you're actually replacing a specific material with a blank material that you're just scrolling through instead of replacing the entire material and everything. In fact, we could press 1, 2, 3 in order to activate different material indexes to change them. I'm just pressing 1, 2, and 3 in order to activate all the different ones. And now we're able to just scroll through different types of materials just on the fly using material scroll. But just letting users know that car paint has now been fixed for 3.0 and higher builds. So here I am in Blender 2.83.18 using an older version of HardOps 9.87.16, which we're on 26 now, and I'm just going to draw a couple of box cuts just to set up some booleans and get the collection party started. And we see that we have our collection named cutters. Let's just double click this and call this, you know, something else. It's kind of a lot of characters, but if we press Alt W, we switch over to Hops tool, right? And if we hold Control, we can use dots in order to highlight our shape. But if we select our shape, because our cutter collection is no longer named cutters, we see that that throws an error. So this is just kind of a long time error that's just been sitting there, and someone pointed it out to us recently, and it's like, let's get that taken care of. So we bring up the current version of Blender, where we're on version 987_26, and we do a couple of cuts same way as before. Boxcutter looking better than ever, and we're just going to call this something else. Old habits never change. And we press Alt W to switch over to Hops tool, and if we hold Control, we can bring up our Hops dots for our cutters. If we just click, we see that we're now able to bring back the particular cutters that are desired without having issues with that particular error. So kind of a long time error, just glad to see this finally out of here. So I have my 3D cursor placed here. If we press Alt X and we bring up our mirror tool, we can press D and change our pivot point over to cursor, where we see that in the help it says that an empty will be created. However, if we press D and we jump over to flip as our mode, it will now say that no empty will be created, which is accurate because whenever you use flip, no empty will be created using that mode. However, when using a mirror modifier, an empty will be created if using a mode that's using a different type of pivot point that isn't the object's origin. Just making that clear. So let's just press D, jump over to flip, press X, jump over to flip again, flip this over, and just like that, we're able to use flip. And with that, the update log for HardOps 987_26 is complete. I hope users enjoy this latest update. A lot has gone into just getting things kind of prepared for Blender 3.0, just making sure everything's working right. However, once everything's back in place, we can go back to, just moving things forward. However, 987 has been a release that we've worked on for the entirety of this year. So just getting it wrapped up and moving on to the next level, 988, is something that I definitely look forward to, and I can't wait to begin working on the next big thing. So with that, we'll wrap up this video. Thank everyone for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.